listening to Talking Africa, the podcast that helps you get behind the news from the continent, brought to you by the Africa Report. My name is Nicholas Norbrook. Remember, to get insight and analysis fresh from the continent, you can sign up to our newsletter at theafricareport.com. You can join the conversation on our Facebook page or at the Africa Report on Twitter. Today on Talking Africa, a special conversation about the long and painful process to try to bring accountability into mining in Africa. An investigation from Reuters last week showed just how much value in gold exports out of Africa was being underreported and showing up in the statistics in places like Dubai, who has seen an incredible jump in gold exports from the continent. You can follow the links to that investigation in the show notes. It's a fascinating read. And so, intrepid reporters that we are, Patrick and I set up our external broadcast unit on a park bench in Paris, staked out the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development Conference on Responsible Mineral Supply Chains, and spoke to some of those in the know. So we're joined by David Lewis of Reuters and Mthembu-Salter from Phuzumoya Consulting, and we have Patrick Smith here, and we're deep in the heart of the 16th arrondissement. Greg and David, you've just emerged from the bowels of the OECD, which is not a rich man's club. We're clear, it's definitely not a rich man's club. And you've been at a mining conference that is looking at essentially responsible sourcing for minerals. Tell us a little bit about, what the discussions are centering on, Gregory.
Right. Well, they're focused on seeing how all the actors in different supply chains can ensure that their supply chains are transparent and traceable and not financing conflict and other risks, including corruption. That was a discussion that came up this morning. There's a lot of focus on the conflict issue. As we move away a bit from artisanal and small-scale mining to large-scale mining, the issues become much more about corruption.
And I imagine the issues of child labour are wrapped up in that, especially when it comes to these smaller informal mines.
Yeah, child labour, pregnant women working in mines, but I think the origin of it was about breaking the link between mineral trading and conflict financing. So there are these other risks around things like child labour, but the real focus of it has been about breaking the link with conflict financing.
We had talked about the Kimberley process a little bit earlier, about the process to try and, I think similarly de-link conflict diamonds and what are called responsibly sourced diamonds. How successful has Kimberley been? How successful are these new schemes that they're trying to push in places like the DRC?
Well, I don't think Kimberley has been a roaring success. I think that's pretty widely known. I think these schemes were more promising because they were less tightly constrained. My understanding was that the Kimberley process was very focused on non-state actors, and so it would leave out the state's armed forces and governments, which is a massive gap. These due diligence programs don't have those limitations. How successful they've been? Well, IPIS, a Belgian research outfit, have just put out a report showing what's been happening in East Congo. In areas, tin and tantalum mines, where these schemes have been implemented, there has been a reduction in conflict, but there have been other unintended consequences too, because in some cases it's made buyers more reluctant to source from those countries, so it's depressed incomes. So in fact there's quite a lot of discussion during this conference about how to spread the costs of these schemes so they don't just fall entirely on the upstream, fall entirely on miners who can ill afford to pay them. But it's Global Witness, if you talk to them, they're saying it's not very effective at all given all this effort. But I think in what they call the 3 T's, tin, tungsten and tantalum, there's been some limited success. When it comes to gold, there's been no success at all.
What a perfect segue. David, Reuters have just come out with this terrific report looking at the the illicit flows of gold from the continent through the Gulf. Could you outline sort of the major findings?
Well, the bottom line is huge amounts of gold, billions of dollars worth of gold is leaving Africa through smuggling and various other underdeclared volumes being underdeclared. And the reason we started looking into this was because obviously small-scale artisanal gold mining operations have been popping up all over the continent over the last decade in particular as gold prices have soared. And obviously artisanal mining provides a livelihood for millions of people, so the numbers of miners and obviously the people who depend on them have soared. What was very difficult was to get a sense of how much gold's actually produced because of the nature of the business. It's virtually always informal, it's largely illegal in many places, completely unregulated. What we did was to look at where the gold was going, because the gold was in general leaving these countries through lots of informal channels, but the one common denominator was UAE, so Dubai being a destination for this gold. So we started analysing years and years of import data in UAE to get a sense of how much gold was coming in from across Africa. And yeah, the volumes rose from roughly 70 tons in 2006 to over 450 tons in 2016. This is data, UAE's data that they provide to Comtrade, the UN trade database. So that's a value of about $15 billion.
It's a huge jump. And what are the sort of the major countries who are exporting? Is it Ghana, DRC, Sudan?
In the database, Ghana's very, very big, Sudan's big, Mali's big, Tanzania's big. The UAE data is based on where the gold, where the importer says the gold came from. So there are caveats in that data because obviously we're very aware that there's smuggling from one African country to another before it leaves. But the data gives you a sense of the scale, especially when you look at the export data on the African side, because a fraction of that gold is actually being officially exported, which gives you a gap of billions of dollars worth of gold that's leaving undocumented.
One country that you didn't mention very much in the report is Sudan. And of course Sudan is in the news for other reasons, the mass protest movement which ousted Bashir and then ousted another military leader, and now we're into this transition. One of the issues raised in Sudan right now is Saudi Arabia and the UAE's offer of $3 billion of aid to Sudan to bolster their transition. And I know the protesters in Khartoum are saying that they don't want this money, they just want a more open and accountable government. And I think there's two areas where the UAE and Saudi are involved in the Sudanese economy, and one is land, farmland, which has been sold at what I'm told is quite cheap prices to agricultural companies in Saudi and UAE, but also the gold trade. And wondering how much you hear anecdotally goes through from Sudan to UAE in terms of gold exports.
Huge amounts. I mean, Sudan is in the data. Sudan is is listed as one of the biggest suppliers
to UAE.
To UAE, yeah. It's in the top three, I think.
Yeah.
Depending on which year you're looking at, but it's very much at the top. Sudanese officials we've spoken to along the way, whether they were in the mining ministry or the Chamber of Mines, say the volumes of smuggling are huge. So government statistics talk about 110 tons officially, the estimate of official production, about 80% of which is artisanal.
Right.
But those are the official figures, whereas they believe it's much, much higher in terms of the volumes of gold being produced by Sudan.
So it could be twice that amount?
It's licking your finger and sticking it in the wind, but they're talking considerably higher than those official stats.
So those for those 110 tons, they are getting some taxes and royalties, are they? Those are official imports, or they're not?
They're official estimates that the mining ministry puts out.
Right.
But again, the vast majority of that, between 80-85%, is artisanally mined.
Right.
So that's the kind of scale of the artisanal mining in Sudan.
Yeah.
But the government, previous government, did towards the end of last year, try and come up with a scheme whereby they were trying to get the central bank and the private banks to offer miners and traders a better price for the gold so that they would be selling it formally within Sudan rather than smuggling it to UAE. And obviously there's no clear indication that that was necessarily being put in place.
What other measures have various governments on the continent been trying to do to tackle the problem, if they consider it a problem at all?
Well, I can speak for the Congolese government. They've introduced this traceability system for gold that's phenomenally complicated and unwieldy. It's reckoned that about 95 or more % of artisanally mined gold in Congo is smuggled. Now, they're now concentrating on the tiny percentage that's left and now making it actually even more difficult by creating additional hurdles, which generates basically further incentives to smuggle. What we often see is that the figures for South Sudan, when it's imported into the UAE, it's often declared as being, say, of South Sudanese origin, because importers want to avoid the impression that they're bringing in conflict gold from Congo, so they misascribe it to being from other countries. And now we have these refineries in Uganda and now in Rwanda, where now the gold that most of that gold that's in those refineries has actually come from Congo, but when it's exported from Uganda, it's exported as Ugandan gold.
So if you look at the data, the UAE import data, as Greg says, there's virtually nothing is recorded as Congolese gold, whereas estimates for Congolese production, artisanally mined gold, vary widely, but they're probably over 20 tons at least, whereas in the official data it's a few hundred kilos.
Right. So I mean, I'd be very interested to hear what Ghana is doing, just because of all the states that you cite, Ghana does seem to be the one which has a state which is, better equipped. I mean, perhaps not, but it seems that it is better equipped to push some kind of regulation on the sector.
Yeah, well, last year they rolled out a nationwide ban on small-scale gold mining, which was meant to offer the government an opportunity to register miners, issue licenses, regulate the entire sector. During our reporting, we found evidence that it was, despite the ban, it was very easy to continue mining, either just because there was no state presence in that particular area, or when there was, you just pay someone off. That's what the miners were telling us. They have registered some miners, but mining very much continued. There was a ban on the import of excavators, because one of the trends has been sort of semi-mechanization, so it's still artisanal mining in theory, but actually it's gone beyond just pickaxes and shovels, and you've started getting Caterpillar trucks and crushers, which obviously means that the volumes of earth being dug up and ore processed becomes significantly bigger.
It's hard not to have slightly dystopic pictures in your mind about riverbeds poisoned with mercury and chunks of the countryside chewed up by these semi-industrial miners.
That was very much the message that the president delivered at Indaba. I think the president of Ghana delivered at Indaba this year, was that I think he said it's gone beyond the era of romantic era of small-scale mining. He talked about foreign-backed operations coming in, and obviously Ghana's cracked down on Chinese involvement in artisanal gold mining.
Is it just the Chinese, or is it other countries? Because we hear a lot about Chinese involvement in the sector.
There's certainly other. I mean, we heard reports of Lebanese-backed operations. I think there's money probably coming from all sorts of areas. In terms of other governments, Tanzania is at the moment trying to roll out a policy of setting up mineral trading centres, which again is a sort of effort to try to formalise the sale of the gold. In Tanzania, obviously Tanzania has its own gold, but as Greg was saying, there's likely to be probably a lot of Congolese gold mixed in with the Tanzanian gold. They had previously said that they wanted the central bank to buy up all the artisanal gold as well. It's too early to say how successful